Tom Bradley wiped grease from his hands and stared at the fusion reactor's warning display. Red lights blinked like angry eyes across the control panel. He had been fixing a minor coolant leak when the whole system decided to have a breakdown. The Frontier's Edge research station floated in the empty space between two star systems, far from any help. Tom pressed his fingers against his temples and tried to think like his grandmother Rose would have. She always said that when machines failed, people had to get creative. The intercom crackled to life. All crew to emergency stations. Primary fusion reactor offline. Backup heating systems activated. The voice belonged to Voss, the Saurak science officer whose scaled skin could handle temperature changes better than most creatures. Tom grabbed his toolkit and headed for the central hub where the other crew members would gather. The station felt different already. The constant background hum of the reactor had stopped, leaving an eerie silence. Tom's breath started forming small clouds as he walked through the corridors. The backup heating system worked hard to keep everyone alive, but it was never meant to handle the full load. They were in trouble. In the central hub, the other 4 crew members stood around a holographic display showing the station's power grid. Voss pointed his clawed finger at various red sections on the map. His reptilian features looked worried, which was never a good sign. Saurax came from a hot desert planet where the nights could freeze water solid, so they knew about temperature. Problems. "How long do we have?" asked Flux, the quartzite engineer. His crystalline body reflected the emergency lighting in strange patterns. Quartzites were living rock creatures who could conduct heat through their bodies like metal pipes. They understood energy better than most species. 72 hours until the rescue ship arrives, Voss replied. But the backup heating will fail in 18 hours. Maybe 20 if we shut down non-essential systems. Drift floated near the ceiling, his gaseous form shimmering like heat waves. Nebulans did not have solid bodies, so temperature changes affected them differently. "The cold will not harm me directly," Drift said in his whispering voice. "But I worry for the rest of you." The 5th crew member was Buzz, an insectoid Chithra with 4 arms and compound eyes. Her species lived on a planet where temperatures swung from boiling hot to freezing cold every few hours. She clicked her mandibles thoughtfully. "My people have survived worse, but we should prepare for the worst case." All eyes turned to Tom. He was the only human on the station, representing the newest species to join the galactic community. Humans were known for being fragile creatures from a mild planet. Most aliens thought they needed perfect conditions to survive. "The human will suffer first," Voss said, not trying to be cruel but stating what he thought was fact. "Human biology requires narrow temperature ranges. Perhaps we should put him in the medical bay where we can monitor his condition." Tom shook his head. "I appreciate the concern, but I think you might be surprised. My grandmother lived through some pretty harsh winters. She taught me a few things about staying warm when the power goes out." Buzz tilted her head, her compound eyes glittering with curiosity. "What kind of things?" "Old tricks. Simple stuff that works when fancy technology fails." Tom looked around the room at his alien colleagues. They all had natural advantages for surviving extreme conditions, thick scales, crystalline heat conduction, gaseous forms, or evolved temperature resistance. But Tom had something else. He had the collected wisdom of thousands of human generations who had survived ice ages, blizzards, and economic disasters with nothing but their wits and whatever materials they could find. "I need to gather some supplies," Tom said. "Basic stuff. From maintenance and the galley, can you give me access to the emergency stores?" Voss entered his authorization code into the supply computer. "What exactly are you planning?" "My grandmother Rose survived the worst winter in Manitoba's history. The power was out for 3 weeks during an ice storm. She kept 6 kids alive, in a house with no heat, using tricks her own grandmother taught her. One of those tricks involved tin cans and candles." The aliens exchanged glances. Their advanced civilization solved heating problems with fusion reactors, plasma conduits, and energy field generators. The idea of using primitive materials seemed almost absurd. "Tin cans?" Flux asked, his crystalline voice ringing like a bell. "Empty food containers," Tom explained. "You punch some holes in them, add a fuel source and a wick, and you have a heater that can burn for hours. It does not sound like much, but my grandmother heated a whole house with them." The temperature in the hub dropped another degree. Tom could see his breath clearly now. The backup heating system was losing the battle against the cold of space. Soon, they would all be fighting for their lives. "I should start gathering materials," Tom said. "We have maybe 16 hours before things get really bad." Voss nodded slowly. "Do what you think is best. We will prepare our own survival methods." Tom headed for the supply storage areas. Behind him, he could hear the aliens discussing their options. Voss would use his natural heat retention abilities. Flux could conduct warmth through his crystalline structure. Buzz had her species' natural resistance to temperature extremes. Drift barely registered temperature at all, but Tom had, something none of them possessed. He had the knowledge passed down from human ancestors who had walked out of Africa with sharpened sticks, who had survived ice ages in caves, who had endured the Great Depression with nothing but determination and clever solutions to impossible problems. His grandmother Rose had been one of those clever survivors. She taught him that humans might look fragile, but they were the descendants of the most adaptable species in the galaxy. When the machines failed, when the power went out, when everything seemed hopeless, humans found a way. Tom pulled out his first empty food can and examined it carefully. Somewhere in his memory, he could hear his grandmother's voice explaining how to punch the holes in just the right pattern. The aliens thought he would freeze first. They were about to learn that humans had been figuring out how not to freeze, to death for a very long time. The battle against the cold was about to begin, and Tom Bradley had weapons his alien friends had never imagined. 14 hours had passed since the heating system failed. Tom's fingers moved quickly through the supply compartments, collecting materials that looked like junk to anyone else. Empty food cans, leftover candles from someone's birthday celebration, cooking oil from the galley, and strips of cloth torn from damaged uniforms. His breath came out in thick white clouds as he worked. The other crew members had retreated to different sections of the station to implement their own survival strategies. Voss had wrapped himself in thermal blankets and was using meditation techniques to slow his metabolism. Flux had positioned himself near the remaining heat sources to absorb and redistribute warmth through his crystalline body. Buzz had found the warmest corner of the station and was using her natural temperature resistance to wait out the crisis. Drift simply floated wherever he pleased, unaffected by the dropping temperatures. Tom spread his collected materials on a work table in the maintenance bay. The metal surface felt like ice against his palms. He could barely feel his fingertips anymore, but his mind was sharp and focused. In his memory, he could hear his grandmother's voice as clearly as if she were standing next to him. Rose Bradley had been a tough woman who raised 6 children during the Great Depression. When Tom was 12, his parents had sent him to live with her for a summer. That was the summer when the worst ice storm in Manitoba's history knocked out power for 3 weeks. Instead of panicking, his grandmother had calmly gathered the children around the kitchen table and taught them how to survive. "Listen carefully," she had said in her steady voice. "Rich folks think they need fancy equipment to stay warm. Poor folks know better. You can heat a whole house with nothing but tin cans, candles, and common sense. My grandmother taught me this trick during the Dust Bowl years." Tom picked up his first empty food can and examined it. The metal was thin but sturdy. He needed to punch holes in it, but not just random holes. The pattern mattered. Too few holes and the fire would die from lack of oxygen. Too many holes, and the heat would escape instead of building up inside the can. He used a maintenance punch tool to create a ring of small holes near the bottom of the can. Then he made larger holes near the top. The bottom holes would let fresh air flow in to feed the flame. The top holes would let hot air escape in a controlled way that would spread warmth instead of wasting it. The secret, his grandmother had explained while showing him the technique, is understanding how air moves. Cold air sinks down and gets sucked into the bottom holes. The fire heats it up and the warm air rises out the top holes. But the can traps most of the heat and radiates it outward. One little candle becomes a heater that can warm a whole room. Tom placed a candle stub inside the can and lit it with a plasma lighter. The small flame flickered for a moment, then grew stronger as air began flowing through the holes he had created. Within minutes, he could feel warmth radiating from the metal sides of the can. It was working, but his grandmother had taught him more than just the basic trick. She had shown him how to make it better. Tom took a second, larger can and carefully cut the top off with a maintenance cutter. He nested the smaller can inside the larger one, creating an air gap between them. The air gap would act as insulation, trapping more heat and making the system more efficient. The flame inside the nested cans burned brighter and steadier. Tom held his hands near the improvised heater and felt genuine warmth for the first time in hours. His fingers started to tingle as feeling returned to them. "That is remarkable," said a voice behind him. Tom turned to see Flux standing in the doorway, his crystalline form reflecting the candlelight in beautiful patterns. "You are creating a convection heating system from refuse." "My grandmother called it a tin can heater," Tom replied. "She said her grandmother learned it from her grandmother, all the way back to the old country. Humans have been passing down survival tricks for thousands of years." Flux moved closer to examine the heater. "The engineering principles are sound. You are using thermodynamics and airflow management to amplify the heat output of a simple flame. My people would approach this problem with energy converters and heat distribution networks." "Sometimes the old ways work better than the fancy ways," Tom said. He was already working on a second heater, this one using cooking oil instead of a candle. He soaked a strip of cloth in the oil and used it as a wick. The oil would burn much longer than a candle, providing heat for hours instead of minutes. "How many of these can you make?" Flux asked. Tom looked at his pile of materials. "Enough to heat our whole survival area, if I space them right. My grandmother heated a 4-bedroom house with 12 of these during that ice storm. We just need to position them correctly and create a circulation system." As he worked, Tom explained more of his grandmother's wisdom. She had taught him that survival was not about having the best equipment, but about making the best use of what you had available. During the Depression, people learned to be creative because they had no other choice. They turned scraps into useful tools, found ways to stretch resources, and shared knowledge that could mean the difference between life and death. My grandmother said humans survived the ice ages not because we were the strongest or the fastest, but because we could think our way out of problems, Tom said as he lit his third heater. Every generation learned new tricks and passed them down to their children. By the time I was born, I had thousands of years of survival knowledge stored up in my family's memory. The maintenance bay was getting noticeably warmer. Tom's improvised heaters were working exactly as his grandmother had promised they would, but he was just getting started. Rose Bradley had taught him that one heater was good, but a network of heaters was better. She had shown him how to position them to create airflow patterns that would distribute warmth throughout an entire building. Tom began calculating the best positions for additional heaters throughout their survival area. He would need to account for the station's ventilation system and the way heat moved through the corridors. It was going to be a complex project, but he had the knowledge to make it work. His grandmother had been right. Humans might look fragile compared to other species, but they carried something more valuable than thick skin or natural temperature resistance. They carried the accumulated wisdom of countless generations who had refused to give up when times got tough. 26 hours into the crisis, Tom had turned the maintenance bay into a workshop that would have made his grandmother proud. 15 tin can heaters burned steadily on various surfaces, casting dancing shadows on the walls and filling the air with blessed warmth. But Tom was not satisfied with just keeping one room comfortable. He had bigger plans. Buzz found him crawling through an access tunnel with a heater in one hand and a roll of reflective insulation in the other. Her compound eyes tracked his movements with interest. "What are you doing now, human?" "Setting up a distribution network," Tom replied, his voice echoing in the narrow space. "One heater warms one room. But if you position them right and use the air ducts to move the heat around, you can warm a whole building." Tom emerged from the tunnel into the corridor outside the central hub. The temperature here was much colder than in his workshop, probably close to freezing. He could see frost forming on the metal walls. But Tom was not worried. He had learned from the master of staying warm in impossible conditions. His grandmother Rose had explained the principle during that terrible ice storm when he was 12. "Heat rises, Tommy," she had said while positioning her own tin can heaters around the house. "But you cannot just let it float up to the ceiling and stay there. You have to guide it where you want it to go. Make the heat work for you instead of against you." Tom placed his first corridor heater near a ventilation intake. The warm air would get sucked into the station's circulation system and distributed to other areas. Then he used strips of reflective material to create heat shields that would direct the warmth toward inhabited spaces instead of letting it escape into the walls. "This is fascinating," said Flux, who had been following Tom's work with growing amazement. "You are essentially creating a primitive but effective heating grid. My people would use plasma conduits and energy field generators to accomplish the same thing." "Sometimes simple works better than complicated," Tom replied. He was attaching a reflective shield to the wall using magnetic clamps. "My grandmother always said that the best solutions are the ones that keep working when everything else breaks down." Tom's next stop was the galley, where he set up 3 heaters in a triangle, patterned around the food preparation area. This served multiple purposes. The heat would keep the water pipes from freezing, provide a warm place for the crew to gather, and create a cooking area where they could heat food and melt ice for drinking water. Voss appeared in the galley doorway, his scaled skin looking less sluggish than it had hours earlier. The Saurak officer had been conserving energy by staying wrapped in thermal blankets, but the improved temperature was reviving him. The thermal sensors show a significant temperature increase throughout this section of the station. How is this possible? Tom was adjusting the airflow around one of his heaters by partially blocking a ventilation grate with a piece of metal sheeting. It is all about understanding how heat moves. You create warm zones and then connect them with air currents. The whole system works together instead of fighting against itself. To demonstrate, Tom showed Voss how the heaters created convection, currents that carried warm air through the corridors. The reflective shields directed the heat where it was needed most. The strategic placement near ventilation intakes meant the station's own air circulation system was helping to distribute the warmth. "My grandmother heated a 4-bedroom house with this method," Tom explained. "She put heaters in key locations and used furniture, mirrors, and even cooking pots to reflect and direct the heat. By the end of that ice storm, her house was warmer than most homes with working furnaces." Drift materialized near the ceiling, his gaseous form shimmering with interest. "Your grandmother sounds like she was an engineer," Tom smiled as he lit another heater. "She never went to engineering school, but she learned from people who survived the Great Depression, the Dust Bowl, and 2 world wars. They had to figure out how to stay alive when they had nothing but scraps and determination." The next few hours were a blur of activity as Tom expanded his heating network throughout the crew's survival area. He placed heaters in the sleeping quarters, the central hub, and the medical bay. Each one was carefully positioned to maximize heat distribution while minimizing fuel consumption. Tom had learned from his grandmother that fuel efficiency was just as important as heat output. During the Depression, People could not afford to waste anything. Every drop of oil, every candle stub, every scrap of cloth had to be used wisely. Rose Bradley had taught him to calculate burn rates and adjust the heaters to provide steady warmth for the longest possible time. "How long will they burn?" asked Buzz, who was warming her hands over one of the oil wick heaters in the central. Hub Tom checked his calculations on a data pad. "With careful management, I can keep the core areas warm for at least 60 hours. Maybe longer if we find more cooking oil or candles in storage." The change in the station's atmosphere was remarkable. What had been a cold, desperate situation was becoming almost comfortable. The crew members no longer huddled in corners trying to conserve body heat. Instead, they moved freely between warm zones, their spirits lifted by the knowledge that they were going to survive. Fluck spent considerable time studying the heater designs. "The efficiency is impressive," he admitted. "You are achieving significant heat output with minimal fuel consumption. The nested can design creates multiple thermal barriers, while the perforation pattern optimizes combustion airflow. My grandmother would be pleased to know her old tricks could impress a crystalline engineer," Tom said. "She always believed that good ideas were good ideas, no matter how simple they looked." As evening approached by the station's artificial schedule, the crew gathered in the galley for their first warm meal since the crisis began. Tom had rigged one of his heaters to serve as a cooking surface, allowing them to heat soup and melt ice for hot drinks. Voss raised a cup of warm broth in a toast. "To human ingenuity," he said, "and to grandmothers who passed down wisdom." Tom accepted the praise, but his mind was already working on improvements to his heating system. His grandmother had taught him that a good solution could always be made better. There were still several areas of the station that could use more heat, and he had ideas for creating better air circulation patterns. The rescue ship was still more than 40 hours away, but Tom no longer worried about their survival. He had something better than advanced technology or natural evolutionary advantages. He had the accumulated knowledge of thousands of human generations who had refused to let the cold defeat them. 48 hours after the heating system failed, the Frontier's Edge research station felt more like a cozy cabin than a disabled spacecraft drifting in the void. Tom's tin can heating network had transformed their survival situation into something almost comfortable. The crew no longer worried about freezing to death. Instead, they found themselves impressed by the warmth and ingenuity surrounding them. In the central hub, Voss was documenting everything Tom did for his official report. The SORAC officer had gone from calculating how long the human would survive to marveling at how efficiently Tom managed their resources. "Explain to me again how you determine the burn rate for each heater," Voss requested, his scaled fingers dancing over his data pad. Tom was adjusting the wick length on one of the oil burners to make it burn more slowly. "My grandmother taught me to watch the flame color and size. A blue flame burns hotter but uses more fuel. A yellow flame burns cooler but lasts longer. You adjust the wick and airflow until you get the right balance for what you need." He demonstrated by partially covering one of the air holes with a small piece of metal. The flame immediately changed from bright yellow to a steadier orange color. "This heater will now burn for 12 hours instead of 8, but it will still put out enough heat to keep this whole area comfortable." Buzz had been watching from across the room, her compound eyes reflecting the warm glow of multiple heaters. "Your species has remarkable knowledge preservation methods," she observed. "Most civilizations rely on digital storage and formal education, but you carry survival information in your cultural memory. My grandmother used to say that books and computers could fail, but knowledge passed down from parent to child would never be lost as long as humans existed," Tom replied. He was working on a new type of heater that used twisted cloth as both wick and fuel. She learned this stuff from her grandmother, who learned it from her grandmother. Each generation added something new to the knowledge. Flux had positioned himself near Tom's most efficient heater, using his crystalline body to absorb heat and redistribute it throughout the room. "I have been analyzing your heating network," he announced. "The energy efficiency is extraordinary. You are achieving 93% heat utilization with primitive materials." Tom looked puzzled. "What do you mean by 93%? Most heating systems lose significant energy through waste heat, inefficient combustion, and poor distribution. Your network captures and redirects nearly all the thermal energy it produces. My people would need sophisticated computer modeling to design something this efficient." "I just did what my grandmother taught me," Tom said with a shrug. "She said heat was too precious to waste, so you had to use every bit of it." Drift floated down from the ceiling to hover near their conversation. "There is something profound about human survival methods," he whispered in his gaseous voice. "Other species adapt to their environment through evolution. Humans adapt their environment through knowledge." Tom had never thought about it that way, but Drift was right. While other species had evolved thick fur, efficient metabolisms, or natural temperature resistance, humans had developed something different. They had learned to change their surroundings to suit their needs, and most importantly, they had learned to pass that knowledge down through generations. "My grandmother survived the Great Depression, Tommy," Rose Bradley had told him during that ice storm so many years ago. "Not because she was strong or lucky, but because she refused to give up. When you have nothing left but your wits and your determination, that is when you discover what humans are really capable of." Tom was beginning to understand what she meant. The aliens around him had impressive natural abilities, but they were limited by those abilities. When the technology failed, they fell back on what evolution had given them. Humans fell back on what thousands of generations had learned through trial, error, and desperate creativity. The proof was all around them. Tom's heating network was not just keeping them alive, it was keeping them comfortable. The crew had warm places to sleep, hot food to eat, and enough heat to move freely throughout their survival area. What should have been a desperate fight for survival had become a manageable situation. "Show me the cooking setup again," requested Buzz, who had become fascinated with the multi-purpose nature of Tom's heaters. Tom led her to the galley, where he had created what his grandmother would have called a proper kitchen. 3 heaters worked together to provide cooking heat, food warming, and ice melting. A 4th heater was positioned to keep the water pipes from freezing. Reflective shields directed heat exactly where it was needed while preventing waste. Each heater serves multiple functions, Tom explained. "This one cooks food and heats water. That one keeps the pipes warm and provides light. The one by the wall warms the whole room and creates air circulation. My grandmother always said that if something only did one job, you were probably not using it right." Buzz clicked her mandibles in appreciation. "Elegant efficiency. Most species would use separate devices for each function. Humans learned to make everything count," Tom said. "During hard times, you could not afford single-purpose tools. Everything had to earn its keep by doing multiple jobs." As the ship's evening cycle approached, the crew gathered in the warm galley for dinner. Tom had used one of his heaters to prepare hot soup and tea, turning their meal into a comfortable social gathering instead of a grim survival ritual. Voss looked around at the warm, well-lit space, filled with the steady glow of tin can heaters. "I owe you an apology, Tom. I calculated that human physiology would make you our weakest link in this crisis. Instead, you became our strongest asset." "Humans are tougher than we look," Tom replied. "We just show our strength in different ways than most species." Flux resonated with agreement, his crystalline form chiming softly. "Physical strength is temporary. Knowledge is permanent. What you have demonstrated here will benefit space travelers for generations to come." Tom felt a warm glow that had nothing to do with his heaters. His grandmother would have been proud to know that her old Depression-era tricks were helping aliens from across the galaxy. Knowledge really was the most valuable thing humans could share with the universe. The rescue ship was still hours away, but nobody was counting the time anymore. They were warm, fed, and comfortable. More importantly, they had learned something valuable about human resilience and the power of knowledge passed down through generations of survivors. The rescue ship Stellar Dawn arrived 18 hours ahead of schedule to find something unexpected. Instead of a desperate crew clinging to life in a frozen station, they discovered 5 beings living comfortably in a warm, well-lit environment that hummed with ingenious improvisation. The rescue team's leader, a veteran Chithra named Captain Ray, had never seen anything quite like it. "Status report," Ray requested as her team boarded the frontier's edge. Her compound eyes swept across the corridor where Tom's tin can heaters cast a warm glow on the walls. The temperature was not just survivable, it was pleasant. "How many casualties?" "No casualties," Voss reported with something like pride in his voice. "Thanks to our human engineer, we maintained comfortable living conditions throughout the crisis." "Captain," Ray's antennae twitched with surprise. In 40 years of rescue operations, she had never boarded a disabled station where the crew was warmer than her own ship. "How is this possible? Our sensors showed complete heating system failure over 50 hours ago." Tom emerged from the galley carrying one of his tin can heaters. "Old family recipes," he said with a grin. "My grandmother taught me how to stay warm when the power goes out." Ray examined the simple device with growing amazement. A tin can, some cooking oil, and a strip of cloth had been transformed into an efficient heating unit that would burn steadily for hours. "This is remarkable engineering. How many of these did you construct?" 27 active heaters positioned throughout our living area," Tom replied. "Plus 8 more ready to light if needed. They are connected in a network that distributes heat evenly and conserves fuel." Ray's rescue team began documenting everything they found. The sophisticated placement of heaters to create convection currents, the use of reflective materials to direct heat precisely where it was needed, the multi-purpose design that provided warmth, light, cooking capability, and air circulation, all from simple tin cans and basic materials. "I must include this in my official report," Ray told Tom. "Emergency services across the galaxy should know about these techniques. How long did it take you to develop this system?" "I did not develop it," Tom said. "My grandmother Rose taught me when I was 12 years old. She learned it from her grandmother during the Great Depression on Earth. The knowledge goes back hundreds of years, maybe thousands." Ray's team leader, a young Saurak named Cole, was taking detailed measurements of the heaters. "The thermal efficiency is incredible. These primitive devices are outperforming emergency heating units that cost thousands of credits." "That is the thing about old knowledge," Tom explained. "It gets tested by real emergencies over and over again. If it does not work, people die, and the knowledge gets lost. If it does work, it gets passed down to the next generation. After hundreds of years, you end up with solutions that are almost perfect." As the rescue team prepared to transfer the crew to their ship, each member of the Frontier's Edge took time to examine Tom's heating network one final time. They understood they had witnessed something special. Not just human ingenuity, but the power of knowledge accumulated over generations of survival. Flux carefully studied the nested can design that created air gaps for better insulation. "I request permission to bring several of these devices back to my homeworld for analysis. My people could learn much from human survival techniques." "Take as many as you want," Tom said. "But the real value is not in the heaters themselves. It is in understanding the principles behind them. Heat circulation, fuel efficiency, multi-purpose design. Those ideas can improve any heating system." Buzz was particularly interested in the way Tom had used reflective materials to create heat. "Distribution patterns. Your species thinks in systems," she observed. "Not just individual solutions, but networks of solutions that work together. My grandmother always said that survival was not about having one perfect tool," Tom replied. It was about having many simple tools that could work together in different ways, depending on what you needed. Drift hovered near Tom as the crew prepared to leave the station. "You have taught us something important about human nature. Other species adapt to their environment through evolution. Humans adapt their environment through accumulated knowledge." Tom began the process of safely extinguishing his heaters, carefully saving the remaining fuel and materials. His grandmother had taught him never to waste anything that might be useful. Later, "Waste not, want not," she used to say. "You never know when hard times might come again." Captain Ray watched this process with fascination. "You are preserving the materials for future use?" "Always," Tom said, pocketing several unused candle stubs and coiling up strips of cloth. "My grandmother survived because she saved everything that might be useful someday. She had a whole box of stuff that looked like junk to other people, but could save your life if you knew how to use it." As they walked toward the rescue ship, Voss looked back at the frontier's edge one last time. The station was returning to its cold, dormant state now that Tom's heaters were extinguished. But the memory of what had been accomplished there would last much longer. "I calculated that you would be our first casualty," Voss admitted to Tom. "I was completely wrong about human capabilities." Tom smiled and patted the Saurak on his scaled shoulder. "That is the thing about humans. We have been figuring out how not to freeze to death for a very long time. Grandma Rose always said the cold might kill you, but only if you let it. And she did not raise me to let anything beat me that easy." On board the rescue ship, Captain Ray began composing her report. The incident would become a case study in emergency survival techniques. Tom's tin can heaters would be added to standard emergency protocols across the multi-species alliance. But more importantly, it would serve as a reminder that sometimes the oldest knowledge was also the most valuable. In the ship's common area, Tom sat with his alien colleagues and shared more stories about his grandmother Rose. He told them about the Great Depression, when millions of humans survived on almost nothing. He described the Dust Bowl years when families learned to make everything count. He explained how knowledge passed from generation to generation, each one adding new wisdom to humanity's survival library. "Your species carries a remarkable inheritance," Ray said as she listened to the stories. "Not just individual knowledge, but collective wisdom accumulated over millennia." Tom nodded, thinking about all the grandmothers and grandfathers who had passed down their hard-won survival skills to ensure their children would be prepared for whatever hardships life might bring. "Humans might look fragile compared to other species," he said, "but we carry something that does not show up in physical scans. We carry the refusal to give up, learned from thousands of generations who faced impossible odds and found a way to survive." The rescue ship continued its journey toward the nearest space station, carrying 5 survivors who had learned something important about human resilience and the power of knowledge preserved through generations of necessity. In his pocket, Tom still carried the materials for making emergency heaters, just as his grandmother had taught him. You never knew when they might be needed again.